TSN's Motoring 96 is brought to you by Quaker State, the intelligent oil for longer engine life, and Midas, the way it should be.
Detroit City, better known as the Motor City, home of the Big Three, birthplace of the automobile industry. And you know, while we have design and research and manufacturing plants now all over North America, if you wish to work in the industry or learn of its history, Detroit is still the place to be. And 1996 will mark the centennial celebration of automobile production. We're down here as Ford has its own celebration of history going on as they honor one of the most important selling tools of today's automobile, safety.
Good morning. I'm Pam Kieber, the Manager of Safety Communications at Ford, and I'd like to be among the first to welcome you today to Ford's 10,000th crash test.
It's very rare, if ever, for the media to be invited to view a crash test. But when you're about to crash vehicle number 10,000, the Ford sensed history was about to be made and a celebration was in order. It was to be a side impact crash with a new Taurus as the target. But before we witness the event, let's go back to crash number 1 in 1954. That test featured a 1950 Ford aimed at the side of a 52 Mercury, the speed 10 miles an hour.
Things were much simpler then. When we started, we didn't think we were going to be crashing 10,000 vehicles. And our measuring techniques were simple. We could only measure 6 things at one time. A year and a half later, we could measure 20 things. Things like the forces in the head and in the chest and the vehicle decelerations. But it was much simpler. We had tow vehicles to pull a car instead of a track. If there was frost on the ground in the morning, but it was going to be a sunny day, you had to wait until perhaps 11 o'clock before you could get the frost cleared up and the sun out, because you couldn't film a crash unless you had good sunshine. The high-speed film required good sunshine, and so that was a prerequisite. So you couldn't even test vehicles all year round. On rollovers, for example, the fellows would just go to a hill we have next to this building, and they would just push the vehicle over and it would tumble on down the hill. So the objective was to protect customers. So there wasn't any government involved, and you had techniques. We thought of even how airbags could be utilized in 1956. We didn't have the technology yet to deploy them, but we knew what they would do if we could find the technology. Our first barrier cost $15,000. A barrier today costs $4 million just to have vehicles hit it. So things have changed.
Not only have the tests changed, but so has a consumer's expectations for what they want in a car.
The sales platform for the 1956 Ford was the ultimate in safety vehicles. It had padded instrument panel. It had a steering wheel with a deep dish and an energy-absorbing steering wheel. It had padded sun visors so that if your head went forward and hit, it wouldn't be injured as readily. It had seat belts, big innovation. And for the dollar of use, it was probably the most significant safety advance of its time. People weren't interested in it. They turned off. The sales marketing people said safety doesn't sell, and it really didn't at that time.
I think selling a car without safety features today is almost impossible, because the desire for safety cuts across demographic lines. It's whether it's men or women or young and old. Now, that's not to say that customers don't want other things in their car. They do, but other things being equal, the car that offers them greater safety is the one they'll choose. Customers' interest in safety is part of the same thing that has caused people to quit smoking and to not drink and drive and to exercise and, to eat in a more healthy way. So it's part of a broader societal phenomena, I think.
So the crash is successful, the airbag deployed. But is all this emphasis on passive safety giving drivers a false sense of security?
Unfortunately, there might be some truth in that. I think there are people that take chances once they're belted in and they have airbags. But the number of lives per 1 million vehicles driven, the number of lives lost continues to drop. When I was in safety in 1956, 50,000 people died a year. with twice as many vehicles covering twice as many miles, we're down about 34,000 fatalities per year. So it has worked.
Given the numbers, one might expect the level of performance to be decidedly boring. Well, while not exactly scintillating, for a round-town runabout it has the desired effect.
At one point in time, everybody drove the largest chunk of iron they could afford. Well, that was then, this is now. Today it's popular because of cars like this Honda Civic to drive a car that's small, affordable, and perhaps more importantly, fuel efficient. This is the Geo Metro, General Motors' version of that very description.
Economy has become such an integral part of the purchasing decision that many auto manufacturers are falling all over themselves to shave the numbers. In the Geo Metro, the quest for economy starts with the engine. It is a 1.3-litre single overhead cam unit that utilises throttle body fuel injection. Power is rated at 70 horsepower and 74 pounds-feet of torque. Given the numbers, one might expect the level of performance to be decidedly boring. Well, while not exactly scintillating, for a round-town runabout it has the desired effect. Part of the reason for the off-the-line pep is the fact that most of the torque reports for duty at less than 3,000 RPM. For the record, the run to the 100k mark takes about 13 seconds. No calendar needed here. If there is a drawback, it is that as you get up into the rev range, the noise level gets increasingly more intrusive. That said, this is not out of place given the price. Matched with this engine is a standard 5-speed gearbox. Two things impress. First, the ratios are well spaced so you get some initial pull as well as comfortable highway cruising. And second, the gear lever actually feels like it's attached to something at the other end of the linkage. Factor in the reasonable clutch action and driving the Metro is rather good fun. The suspension features McPherson struts at all four corners and stabilizer bars at both ends. The degree of comfort is acceptable. While large road irregularities are absorbed in fine fashion, some of the small ones find themselves straight back to the occupants. In the handling department, the Metro surprised. Having thrashed it around a track, the Metro hangs in there fairly well. There is body roll and there certainly is understeer, mainly because of the skinny 155/80 tyres. However, both are manageable.
The steering on this Geo Metro is manual. In other words, it's not power assisted. Now, whilst you're out on the open road, it's not a problem because the on-centre feel is reasonable and you don't have to exert that much energy. However, when you come to back out of a parking spot, it gets heavy. There is a bright side in all of this though, you'll end up like me. Bit of the old Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Stopping power is supplied by a power-assisted front disc drum design. During the brake test, the Metro came to rest from 80k in just 119 feet, which is not too bad. Anti-lock brakes are an available option, one that is worth the extra cash.
Given the exterior dimensions of this Geo Metro, you'd expect the rear seat to be rather cramped. Well, far from it. There's plenty of toe room, an abundance of knee room, and more than adequate headroom. In short, small cars are not quite as small and cramped as they used to be.
Inside, the Metro is nicely finished. The seats are well shaped and offer a high degree of support, even if the seat base is on the short side. The instrumentation is analog, although given the manual box, I would like to see a tachometer. The heater controls are of the slide variety and sit high up in the centre of the dash. Unfortunately, the Delco radio has been relegated to a spot way down low. Elsewhere, the driving controls are certainly well placed, and this holds true for the manual mirrors, locks and windows. The trunk is quite spacious, features a bumper-level liftover, split folding rear seats and an interior remote release. On the safety front, the Metro offers dual airbags, available ABS and child-proof rear door locks.
Well, that's it for this edition of Test Drive. You know, I wouldn't want to drive the Geo Metro to Florida and back, but as a round-town runabout, well, that's a completely different story. The other thing this car's got going for it is economy. Not only is it affordable, it's also very affordable to operate. During the test drive, we averaged no less than 50 miles per gallon. Now that is worth writing home about. You're looking at the latest in barrier technology here at the Ford Crash Center in Dearborn, Michigan. This wall weighs 1.2 million pounds and it's worth $4 million. And it can give the technicians crash data within 30 minutes compared to 4 days. Now, if only they could discover what's wrong with our vehicles in that amount of time. But hey, that's why we got Bill Gardner.
This week I want to talk about starter motors, that little electric motor that lives underneath your engine and cranks over that great big engine on a really cold morning with relative ease. Now here's the location of the starter motor on most vehicles. There is the odd vehicle where you can see the starter motor from the under hood area, but in most cases you're going to be underneath the vehicle like we are right now in order to view the starter motor. Now in just about all cases they're bolted to the engine or transmission right where the engine and transmission intersect, because the starter pinion, the small gear inside the starter, has to mesh with this great big ring gear that we refer to that is on the flex plate or flywheel of the engine. Now those two mesh when you turn the key, and it allows the starter motor to crank the engine over. Now I've hooked up a jumper wire to this starter motor so that I can get it to crank from underneath here, and that's what's going to happen when you turn the key in the morning. Starter pinion intersects with this ring gear, cranks the engine over. Now I've moved the inspection cover aside so that you could see this area here, and that's exactly what happens when you crank that thing over in the morning. Here's a typical starter motor we've removed from the car, mounted in the vise, and I've hooked it up to a battery over here via some booster cables. Now when I hook up my jumper wire to this one, you're going to see the starter motor engage. That's what it would do in the car. The starter pinion kicks forward and engages with this area here where our flywheel is located, and it would begin to crank the engine over. Now in order to do that, the solenoid up here has a lot to do with that. It not only electrically connects the battery to the starter motor, but in this case it also mechanically kicks the starter drive into engagement with the flywheel. Now in most cases the solenoid is either integral or mounted on the starter in this fashion, with the exception of Ford products which are mounted remotely on the fender. Now down inside the front of the starter here is this assembly here we refer to as the drive or pinion assembly. There's the pinion gear meshing with the flywheel, and there's an overrunning clutch in this assembly that allows it to freewheel in one direction and lock up in the other, so that if you accidentally forget to or release the key once the engine's going, you won't overspeed and destroy the starter. Now in this area here, the starter motor is basically just a 12-volt DC electric motor with brushes, bushings, field coils, etc. Everything you'd expect to find in an electric motor. Now next week I want to show you a little bit different slant on starter motors, and that's what we refer to as a gear reduction starter that's allowed engineers some flexibility in a couple of areas. Till then, I'm Bill Gardner for Motoring 96.
If you view the automobile as an extension of one's own personality, then the Rolls-Royce Flying Spur is perhaps the ultimate when it comes to self-expression.
Flying Spur is an extension of the direction that Rolls-Royce is heading in the 90s and into the next century. These are cars that are niche cars, highly powerful, performance-oriented, but still with that Rolls-Royce fascination and bringing the myth to a reality. Very powerful car and very interesting to drive and very well pointed and extremely fast for a car of its size.
The Flying Spur's turbocharged hand-assembled V8 has been given more power, in excess of 340 horsepower, better fuel economy, and reduced exhaust emissions. A measure of the performance offered is the fact that this powertrain will propel this 6,000-pound car from 0 to 100 kilometers an hour in just 6.5 seconds.
Flying Spur is a limited edition 50 cars. Now, Rolls-Royce are business people, and they've told us 50 cars, but there's been a lot of interest in the car, and perhaps they'll consider extending this, which they often do, an extra 10%. So maybe it would be 55, but that would be the absolute maximum.
Well, with the Rolls-Royce, you can custom order the vehicle to any which way that you like the car. You can choose any color choice for the outside. Leather, you can choose any color of the leather that you'd like. Contrasting piping on the leather. You can have wooden picnic tables in the back. There's an area that you can have 2 Sony TVs installed. You can have a bar placed in the back seat. If you're on the road all the time, and you can turn your Rolls into an office. You can have a computer inside. You can have a fax machine. We'll custom order the vehicle to suit your lifestyle.
It's something very special. It's like an art form, like a Picasso or a Jackson Pollock. Engineering is right up there, but I'm sure that Lexus or Mercedes would have us beat in the out-and-out engineering. But they can't touch us when it comes to finish and fit and taste and finesse.
It would seem that owning a car in Canada is becoming a more pleasing experience. The latest J.D. Power Customer Satisfaction Survey indicates the Canadian auto industry is improving. The survey is based on the dealership experience, performance, and at least 30% of the overall score is for service and repairs. 12 of the Canadian firms improved their scores. The Canadian arm of BMW went up an astonishing 29 points from 1994, and Hyundai improved 22 points. The study records the impressions of thousands of Canadian vehicle owners after 12 to 18 months of ownership.
It's time to say goodbye to our long-term Tacoma. You know, when we first picked this vehicle up, I viewed the experience with a degree of trepidation. Having lived with it for a prolonged period, I've learned a few things, and I've learned to like it. First of all, it offers all the comfort and convenience of any passenger car, and secondly, it gives you the added versatility of the flatbed, which will carry everything, including the kitchen sink. The other thing, I realized how important the extra cab option is. It gives you, most importantly, lockable storage space, and secondly, the availability of extra seating. Now, on the subject of seating, it's time to go to our special backseat correspondence. Well, there you have it. 2 thumbs up from 2 of the toughest critics in the business.
Our Midas tip of the week concerns starter motors. Most of today's vehicles start pretty willingly, but I'm sure at one time or another you've all experienced a situation that required extended cranking. Maybe your ignition system was wet, car could have been flooded, or maybe you just ran out of fuel and it was slow picking up the new fuel you put in the tank. In any case, underneath your engine, there's an electric motor like this that's only intended for part-time duty. 10 to 15 seconds of cranking is the most this motor should endure. If the car hasn't started in that length of time, you need to rest this motor. Pause for 1 or 2 minutes, allowing it to cool down. These things get real hot in a real hurry. If you do that, and you're careful about those starting attempts, there's a good chance you may never have to replace this starter motor. They're pretty expensive. That's your Midas tip of the week.
John Rhodes. What a great name for a driver examination center. And there should be more of those. That's coming up next on Kenzie's Corner.
Kenzie's Corner with Jim Kenzie.
Ontario is currently the only province that requires that people over the age of 80 take an annual road test to requalify for the driver's license. But soon, super seniors will only have to requalify every 2 years, and they won't have to take a road test if they can prove that their vision is okay, that they understand the rules of the road, and that somehow they won't get into a crash, although how they'll prove that is anybody's guess. Now, I think Ontario's going in the wrong direction here. I think seniors should be required to be retested. Now, I'm not discriminating against older drivers. After all, they've got a better safety record than most age groups, frankly, because most of the really bad ones killed themselves off when they were teenagers. But I think everybody should be retested. After all, airline pilots get re-examined every 6 months, and they have a much better safety record than car drivers do. Now, the province is canning this retest for budgetary reasons. But again, they're looking at it backwards. They shouldn't look at testing as a cost center, but as a potential profit center. There are millions of drivers in this province, and if they are retested every 5 years, well, that's a pretty nice chunk of business. Test centers could be set up across the province and staffed with qualified examiners. Now, the drivers would pay a substantial fee to cover this infrastructure. Now, some might complain that they can't afford it. Well, I'm sorry, we can't afford the costs of bad driving anymore. The person who benefits most from a license, obviously, is the person who has it, and the public shouldn't be expected to subsidize it. Besides, we, the car buyers and taxpayers, have already spent billions on safer cars and better highways. It's about time we invested in the third component of traffic safety, namely the driver. So there it is, Ontario, and the rest of you provinces. Here's a program which could save lives, create jobs, reduce the impacts on our health care and judicial systems, and make a profit. If you're not interested in running it, give me a call. I'd love to own that franchise. I'm Jim Kenzie.
You're looking at your average family of crash test dummies. Now, in a future program, we're going to show you some of the vigorous testing that these dummies must go through before they're actually put in a vehicle. Now, these dummies are based on your average human being. They tell me that's a height of about 5'9" and a weight of about 165 pounds. Wait a minute, that sounds like me. Oh, fortunately, we're out of time, so we can't elaborate more on this subject, except to say, we'll see you next week for more stories about cars and the people who drive them.
Okay, Lynn, I'd like to introduce you to the 1995 Chevy Cavalier.
Oh, that's a nice car.
Isn't that a beautiful car? Let's look at the finish on it.
That's really
And you know, General Motors has gone to great lengths to make sure that it stays looking like this for a long time. Things that are standard on this car, you normally have to pay extra for, so I'll be pointing them out as we go around the car.
Okay.
Women can sell, they just haven't been given the opportunity to do it. And this course addresses that opportunity and has been successful and continues to be successful doing just that.
The car comes equipped standard 2 airbags in the front. Your sensors are here, here, and here.
Well, when they first came with the Pony and the Stellar, it was sort of the Bic lighter of automobiles. You keep it for 3 years and throw it away because the value at the end of it was nothing. And it seems that every time they've launched a new vehicle, it's been a quantum leap forward in quality, in performance, and fit and finish. And they're a pretty serious automobile and pretty serious company, I think. They're getting better, and they're getting better in leaps and bounds, I think.
I think Hyundai has come a long way, but not far enough. I think it's still the cheaper car in some ways. I don't think they last as long. I think they creak earlier than the competition. And so, although they've improved, I think they have to be a little better still, especially with the prices going up now.
TSN's Motoring 96 has been brought to you by Quaker State, the intelligent oil for longer engine life, and Midas, the way it should be.